What if I told you there is one sentence, just one, that can make a narcissist recoil, lose their grip, and even fear you forever? This sentence will not only strip them of their illusion of control, but also empower you with a force greater than their manipulation, truth wrapped in courage. Stick with me, because in this speech, we won't just expose the mind of the narcissist, we'll arm you with the tool to take back your power forever. The true power of a narcissist does not lie in their words, their beauty, or even their intelligence. It lies in their ability to make you doubt your own reality. Like a hypnotist of the mind, they do not force you with chains, but convince you to wear them yourself. The narcissist operates through a sinister form of psychological alchemy. They take your virtues, your empathy, your loyalty, your desire to see the good in others, and twist them into instruments of your own captivity. It is not that the narcissist possesses some supernatural gift, but rather that they are relentless in their mission to define your reality for you. They tell you who you are, what you think, how you should feel, and why you are wrong to feel otherwise. Over time, this subtle but continuous erosion of your self-perception creates dependency. You begin to look to them for validation, for clarity, even for truth itself. And this is where their real power is born, not from domination, but from delegation. They condition you to hand over the authority of your own mind. Consider the story of Sarah, a successful woman with a warm heart and a history of always giving others the benefit of the doubt. She met a man who praised her endlessly in the beginning, making her feel like the most extraordinary person in the world. But over time, he began planting seeds of doubt. "Why did you look at him like that?" he'd ask, or, "You're too sensitive, you always overreact." At first, these seemed like small comments, harmless questions, but they grew. Soon, Sarah found herself questioning every decision, apologizing constantly, and seeking his approval just to feel stable. She had not changed. She had simply transferred the authority of her self-perception to someone else, a man who, beneath his charm, only sought control. That is how narcissists work, not through open conflict, but through slow, persistent confusion. They weaponize ambiguity. They make their victims walk on eggshells while claiming to be the ones injured. They pretend to be the mirror, but distort your reflection until you no longer recognize your own soul. The narcissist's true power, then, is not in their strength. It is in your silence. It is in the space you give them to write your story for you. They do not overpower, they infiltrate. They learn your values, your fears, your insecurities, and then, like a master manipulator, they reshape them to serve their agenda. They thrive not on truth, but on distortion, not on confrontation, but on confusion. They become the voice inside your head, not by yelling, but by whispering often enough that you begin to echo their lies as if they were your own thoughts. They convince you that they are the sun, and you are a mere planet orbiting around their glow, when in fact they are the ones desperately feeding off your light to survive. To truly grasp the psychology behind a narcissist's fear, one must peel back the layers of illusion they work so hard to maintain. At the surface, they appear confident, often excessively so, dripping with charm, self-assurance, and what seems like an unshakable sense of superiority. But beneath that polished veneer lies a core so fragile, so insecure, that it must be carefully hidden at all costs. You see, the narcissist is not built upon strength. They are constructed upon a foundation of internal chaos, an identity riddled with shame, self-loathing, and fear of exposure. Their entire persona is a carefully manufactured defense mechanism designed to keep the truth buried, that deep down they fear they are insignificant, unlovable, and powerless. And it is this truth, the one they desperately deny, that keeps them up at night. Their fear is not of you specifically, but of what you represent when you see through them. Because the moment you stop believing their lie, you become a threat to the fantasy they've built around themselves. A narcissist cannot tolerate true self-reflection because it would shatter the carefully curated image they have of themselves. This is why they deflect, project, and twist facts. They fear criticism, not because it wounds their pride, but because it threatens to awaken a buried truth they've spent a lifetime running from. Take, for example, the case of Marcus, a corporate executive who commanded rooms with his booming voice and an endless stream of accolades. He demanded obedience, loyalty, and admiration from his team. But the moment someone questioned his authority, or worse, pointed out an actual flaw in his decision-making, Marcus would fly into a subtle but calculated rage. He wouldn't yell outright. He'd belittle. He'd gossip. He'd isolate that person socially until they either conformed or crumbled. Why? Because that simple act of being challenged pricked the fragile balloon of superiority he so desperately needed others to inflate. One honest critique became a threat to his entire identity. The fear is not in the words. It is in the mirror those words create, a mirror they cannot bear to look into. What terrifies the narcissist most is authenticity, not because authenticity is aggressive or loud, but because it cannot be controlled. A person who is grounded in truth, who has done the inner work and walks in alignment with their values, becomes immune to manipulation, and this is the narcissist's nightmare. You see, a narcissist's control depends entirely on distortion. They need you to question yourself, to doubt your instincts, to believe that you need them to validate your worth. But when you show up clear, composed, and no longer seeking their approval, their tactics fall flat. It's like a magician performing for someone who already knows how the trick is done. The illusion vanishes. That loss of control, that exposure to the light of reality, is where their fear lives. They cannot exist in truth because truth reveals the hollowness of their identity. And so they spend their lives running from it, avoiding it, attacking those who bring it, and fearing the day when someone might stand in front of them, unshaken, and simply see them for who they truly are. There is no greater force in the hands of an individual than a clearly defined sense of identity, fortified by unwavering boundaries. This, above all else, is what renders the narcissist powerless. You see, narcissists survive by attaching themselves to those who do not yet know the full measure of who they are. They exploit uncertainty like a parasite feeding off confusion. When a person lacks a solid internal framework, when their self-worth is shaped by external opinions and their values fluctuate to avoid conflict, they become malleable, pliable, easy to control. But when a person discovers who they truly are, when they define themselves not by others' praise or criticism, but by the quiet conviction that lives within, they become immovable. It is this self-possession that disrupts the narcissist's grip. For once you have decided who you are, no one else gets to write your narrative, and the narcissist loses their most powerful weapon, the ability to define you through manipulation. Imagine a woman named Elena, raised in an environment where speaking up was punished and pleasing others was the only way to earn love. For years, she carried these patterns into adulthood, constantly adapting herself to the desires of others. Then she met a narcissist, charming, persuasive, and masterfully attuned to her need for affirmation. At first, he seemed like the answer to every void she had carried inside. But slowly, he began to push her limits. He demanded access to her time, her thoughts, her body, her dreams. And because her identity was still tied to being accepted, she complied. Until, after a period of emotional devastation, Elena began the journey inward. She stopped asking who others wanted her to be and started asking who she truly was. She began setting small boundaries, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. She said no. She asked for space. She no longer explained herself, and something remarkable happened. The narcissist began to unravel. The control he once held dissolved like smoke in sunlight, because with every boundary Elena held, she was reclaiming her authorship, rewriting her script from victim to victor. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are bridges that connect us to the parts of ourselves we've long neglected. And when you anchor your life in principles, non-negotiable truths about how you expect to be treated, you become invulnerable to the emotional chaos the narcissist tries to create. They will test those boundaries. They will push. They will twist your strength to appear as cruelty, your clarity as selfishness. But every time you stand firm, every time you refuse to abandon yourself to avoid their wrath, you send a signal that shakes them to their core. I belong to myself. This is a language the narcissist does not speak and cannot decode because they live in a world where identity is borrowed and boundaries are made to be broken. When you no longer dance to that rhythm, you become a mirror to their own emptiness, a reminder of the strength they can never manufacture and the self-trust they fear they will never possess. There are moments in life when the entire balance of power shifts, not with a scream, not with violence, but with a calm, composed declaration of truth. And in the battle against narcissistic manipulation, that power is encapsulated in a single sentence. I know who I am, and you no longer have power over me. On the surface, it may sound simple, almost unassuming, but within these words lies a force that strikes directly at the heart of a narcissist's illusion of dominance. You see, the narcissist thrives in the shadows of your self-doubt. Their control is not enforced, it is permitted. It lives in the unspoken agreements we make with them. The agreement to keep the peace by staying silent, the agreement to abandon our instincts to avoid conflict, the agreement to hand over our inner compass in exchange for their approval. But when you speak this sentence, what you are doing is far more than delivering a line. You are breaking the contract. You are signaling, not with rage, but with resolve, that the days of being defined by someone else are over. You are stating with clarity that you have stepped outside of their illusion and reclaimed your sovereignty. And to the narcissist, that is the equivalent of an earthquake tearing through their carefully constructed facade. Let us look at the example of Thomas, a young man who had been caught in the web of a narcissistic mentor for years. This mentor praised him excessively when Thomas complied, but demeaned and humiliated him when he questioned anything. For a long time, Thomas was afraid to leave. He feared losing guidance, opportunity, and above all, approval. He began to equate the mentor's manipulation with wisdom. But eventually, the emotional toll became too heavy. Through quiet introspection and the study of his own values, Thomas came to a powerful realization. The praise he was receiving was conditional, and the criticism was a tool of control. Armed with this awareness, he walked into the mentor's office and calmly said, I know who I am, and you no longer have power over me. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He spoke from the deepest part of his being. And in that moment, everything changed. The mentor laughed at first, tried to belittle him, threatened consequences, but it didn't matter because Thomas no longer needed permission to walk in his truth. That sentence, delivered with self-assurance, shattered the invisible leash that had kept him bound for so long. What makes this sentence so powerful is not just the words themselves, but the energy behind them. It is the energy of someone who has returned home to themselves, who no longer seeks validation from the outside world because they have built a solid foundation within. When you say, I know who I am, you are doing something revolutionary. You are anchoring your identity in your own truth. And when you add, and you no longer have power over me, you are declaring that their approval is no longer your currency. This is devastating to the narcissist because it strips them of their illusion of control. Without your emotional dependency, their game is over. They may rage, they may sulk, they may try to claw their way back through guilt, charm, or manipulation. But once you've spoken this sentence, not as a defense mechanism, but as a spiritual conviction, you will find that the chains they once wrapped around your mind have no lock and never did. The reason this one sentence, "I know who I am and you no longer have power over me," works not just temporarily, but permanently, lies in its very nature. It is not a weapon pointed outward, but a truth planted inward. It does not attempt to change the narcissist, nor does it engage with their drama or manipulation. It is a declaration of self-possession, a line drawn in the sand that cannot be erased because it exists not in conversation, but in conviction. You see, narcissistic control thrives on emotional loops. Cycles of confusion, hope, validation, and disappointment. These loops only continue if you are unconsciously trying to earn something: approval, love, peace, safety. But this sentence severs that loop, not because it silences the narcissist, but because it silences your need for their validation. It is not about changing them, it's about changing you. When spoken with genuine inner alignment, this sentence is not a performance. It is a shift in consciousness, and once that shift happens, it becomes irreversible. You have crossed an invisible threshold that no amount of manipulation can undo, because what has changed is not your words, but your frequency. You no longer vibrate at the level where their games operate. Take, for instance, the story of Julia, who had been in a relationship with a narcissistic partner for 6 years. Every time she tried to leave, he would pull her back in with a mixture of affection and guilt, promising change, only to revert to emotional control once she returned. Over time, she found herself hollow, unsure of what was real and what was manipulation. Her identity had become so entangled with his perception of her that she couldn't remember what she wanted, or even who she was before the relationship began. But through therapy, self-reflection, and deep personal growth, Julia started to rebuild her sense of self, brick by brick. And one day, after yet another emotional ambush disguised as reconciliation, she looked him in the eye and said, "I know who I am, and you no longer have power over me." The moment she said it, she felt a deep inner stillness, not the kind that needs applause or retaliation, but the kind that signals completion. She didn't need him to understand, agree, or even react. She wasn't speaking to him. She was speaking to the version of herself that had once stayed silent, and in doing so, she rewrote the ending of her own story. This sentence works permanently because it signals the end of inner conflict. It is not a boundary set for the narcissist. It is a vow made to the self, and once made, it cannot be undone by persuasion, guilt, or charm, because the individual no longer responds to those tactics. They are now governed by a higher authority, their own truth. When a person knows who they are, truly knows, they stop negotiating with chaos. They no longer abandon themselves to avoid discomfort. The narcissist may still attempt their familiar patterns, but those patterns fall flat when there is no emotional hook to grab onto. The sentence becomes a seal upon the soul, an unshakable affirmation that the search for external approval has ended. And because it ends the internal struggle, the very fuel the narcissist feeds on, it renders their methods powerless, not just in that moment, but forever. To use the sentence, "I know who I am and you no longer have power over me," without fear, one must first understand where fear truly comes from. It does not arise from the narcissist's presence, nor from their reaction to your words. It is born from within, from the remnants of a belief system that tells you your safety, your worth, and your peace depend on their acceptance. Fear clings to the illusion that if you assert yourself, you will lose something essential: love, stability, validation. But the moment you realize that what you fear losing was never real, only a performance engineered to control, you awaken to a truth that is far more powerful than fear. The sentence, then, is not a tool of aggression. It is an act of liberation. And to speak it without trembling, you must first separate the false self, the version of you shaped by fear, from the true self, shaped by purpose, dignity, and truth. This shift is not made in haste. It comes through preparation, through reflection, journaling, meditation, and the steady reclaiming of your voice. You prepare not by practicing confrontation, but by embodying your self-worth so deeply that when the time comes to speak the words, they do not come from the throat, they rise from the soul. Consider the journey of Darren, a man whose father controlled him with criticism masked as guidance. All his life, Darren tried to earn approval, choosing careers, partners, even beliefs based on what his father deemed acceptable. Whenever he questioned or pushed back, the response was swift: shame, ridicule, silence. Darren learned to associate speaking his truth with punishment, but deep within, a storm was building. After years of living as a shadow of himself, he began doing the internal work. He read, he wrote, he sat in quiet contemplation asking, "What do I believe? What do I want?" With each answer, he stitched his identity back together. Eventually, the moment came. During a conversation riddled with judgment and control, Darren looked at his father, not with anger, but with clarity, and said, "I know who I am, and you no longer have power over me." The room fell silent. His hands were steady. He did not raise his voice or explain himself. He did not defend. He had already won the battle inside. Fear had no more power over him because he no longer depended on that relationship to define his value. Using the sentence without fear requires something deeper than courage. It demands ownership. Ownership of your story, your truth, your future. When you claim that ownership, you no longer enter these moments seeking approval or control. You enter as one who has already chosen freedom, and this freedom gives you poise. The narcissist may shout, dismiss, mock, or manipulate, but none of it lands because you are no longer a character in their story. You are the author of your own. Fear dissolves the moment you realize that there is nothing they can take from you that you truly need, and nothing they can give you that you cannot give yourself. When you speak the sentence from this space, it is not a confrontation. It is a graduation, a silent, powerful, irreversible step into the life you were meant to live. My friend, understand this. The moment you declare, "I know who I am, and you no longer have power over me," you are not simply uttering words. You are crossing a threshold. You are no longer begging for scraps of approval at a table built on manipulation. You are walking away, not in bitterness, but in power. This sentence is not an act of rebellion. It is a proclamation of freedom. It is the death of the false self and the birth of the authentic one. No narcissist can stand in the presence of someone who is fully rooted in their identity, because manipulation needs confusion to thrive, and your clarity becomes their undoing. They may lash out. They may retreat. They may try again. But once you have spoken this truth, not with trembling lips, but with a grounded spirit, they can no longer touch the part of you that matters most, your soul, your purpose, your peace. The chains they held were never locked. The prison door was always open, and now, armed with the truth of who you are and the boundaries you have built, you walk forward, not as a victim of their games, but as the master of your destiny. So I say to you, let them fear, not because you are cruel, not because you shouted, but because you no longer need them to be free. You have chosen yourself, and that, my friend, is the ultimate victory.